Dubey sir, now you can unmute and say.
Okay.
Recording has begun.
Okay. So good morning, friends. It's really nice to be back again this Sunday. And our speaker this morning is Mr. Rajan Chandi. Uh, I think most of us have heard Mr. Chandi earlier, but for those of us who are hearing him for the first time, I'll briefly introduce Mr. Chandi to you. Mr. Chandi completed his BSc Physics from Loyola College, Chennai in 1970, after which he studied law at Bangalore University, but was mainly a political activist during the years 1970 to 1980. Having many questions about political activism and the whole meaning of life, etc., he quit in 1981 and went to Germany, Heidelberg University, where he studied Western philosophy and Indology from 1981 to 88. There he was struggling with the limitations of Western philosophy when he accidentally stumbled upon the teachings of Buddha, Krishna, and Ramana Maharshi all around the same time. This changed the trajectory of his life and returned to India. He worked in the developmental sector for some years, which also did not satisfy him. In 1995, Mr. Chandi came to Rishi Valley School with his wife and a 3-year-old daughter. He has been in Rishi Valley since then, interacting with students, teaching economics, and pursuing the own inner questions. Mr. Chandi is going to speak to us on the foundation of the Buddha Dharma, the Four Noble Truths. So, Mr. Chandi, a very warm welcome to you, and we are really very thankful that you accepted the invitation and you are with us again. Thank you. Thanks a lot. You can begin your talk now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dubey. I'm very happy to be once again with you, sharing some ideas. And the last time I spoke about some aspects of Krishnaji's thought, and at the end of it, there was a request that I take another session this time on the Buddha. It is maybe a little incongruous that I speak about the Buddha Dharma because this is a Krishnaji circle, but since the request came from you, I thought, yeah, I should do so. And, I will be presenting things from a traditional Buddhist point of view. So bear that in mind. Now, when Krishnaji begins his talks, he often asks us to set aside all our preconceived notions, our conditioning, and so on, and just listen, which is good advice. When the Buddha talks, or when one listens to a Buddhist teaching, also some requirements are stated. The main requirement is the motivation with which we listen. When we listen to a teaching of the Buddha, then it is very important that our motivation be correct or pure. And the ideal motivation with which we listen to a teaching of the Buddha is that we are listening not just for our own sakes, but for the sake of all beings. We are trying to understand the nature of the world, the way the Buddha saw it and taught it, but not just to end our own suffering, but to end the suffering of all beings. Because in Buddhism, it is generally taught that all beings, all sentient beings, not just human beings, all beings which can feel, right from the smallest insects up to the gods, are exactly the same in a fundamental respect. That is, every one of us wants every conceivable type of happiness. For very small things, if there's a dish of food on the table and we are serving ourselves, we would tend to take what we think is the choicest pieces of the food, if it's a sweet or whatever it is. So from a small thing like that to bigger things, each one of us is preoccupied with our happiness, and each of one of us wants to avoid even the slightest suffering. So it is taught that just like I want to avoid any and all forms of suffering and gain every kind of conceivable happiness, so does every other sentient beings. So really speaking, at the most fundamental level, there's no difference between me and others. And therefore, just as it is legitimate for me to try to end my own suffering and to find happiness, so it is for others. And therefore, we need to take into account others' search for happiness and the ending of suffering, because it is as relevant as ours. In fact, in one sense, the Buddhists say it is more relevant because I am one single person. My happiness and suffering is that of one single person, whereas others are innumerable. So their happiness and suffering is in some sense much greater than mine. And it is that perspective that the Buddhists say that you should always work for the well-being of others. That is essential. And the Buddha himself, when he left and went to try and understand the nature of the world, the nature of the suffering that he saw, all know the story, I guess, that he was living a very protected life as a prince. And he goes out with his charioteer and he sees a sick man, an old man, and a corpse. And each time he asks the charioteer, "What is this?" And he explains, "He is sick, my lord," and so on. And he says, "Will that happen to me?" And the charioteer tells him, everybody is subject to sickness, and likewise aging, likewise death. When he realizes this, he realizes that all the pleasures that he is currently having don't mean much, because they're all going to end in old age, sickness, and death. And then he leaves the palace and goes off, becomes sannyasi. And he is searching for a solution to this problem, but he's searching not just for himself, but for the sake of all living beings. So that was the Buddha's motivation to go on his search. And when we listen to a teaching of his, as far as possible, we must have a similar motivation. So when Krishna says, set aside all your preconditions and conditionings and so on, and listen carefully, the Buddhists say, listen with this motivation. Motivation which has a deep concern for all living beings. Secondly, they say a very important condition of understanding what the Buddha is saying is to realize that we are sick. Not in a physical sense, maybe, but mentally, deeply, existentially. And why are we sick? Because all our lives we've been searching for happiness. All our lives we have been trying to avoid suffering. But somehow, despite our best intentions, we seem to end up doing the opposite. We seem to end up creating suffering for ourselves. And the happiness we are searching for eludes us. When we realize this, and if you look at our lives, this is largely true. It is for me. I don't know if it is for all of you. But for most people, one could say that though they are searching for happiness, they end up running into the arms of suffering. This points to some basic wrongness of the mind. Some fundamental reason why we are maybe searching in the wrong place for happiness, or searching in the wrong way for happiness. And therefore, this realization that there's a fundamental flaw in our very existence is what wants to make us listen to the Buddha. So these two conditions are very important. One is that we are concerned for the well-being of all people, all beings. And secondly, we realize that there is some basic flaw in us. And therefore, we go to listen to the teachings of the Buddha. So these are in some senses the conditions for benefiting from listening to the teachings of the Buddha. Okay, now, so as I told you, even though many of you are, well, the word follower is inappropriate, I guess, with Krishnaji, but in some sense, followers of Krishnaji, I'll say. I don't know what your attitude is to other teachings, which are not that of Krishnaji. But since, as I said, the request came from you, I'm now going to present the Buddha's teachings the way it is traditionally understood by the Buddhists. And if there's something in it which is benefit for you, I'd be very happy. If there's nothing in it which is of benefit to you, then you can just, well, leave it aside. So you take what you find interesting and beneficial for you, what helps you in your journey, in your search. I'm going to do this presentation on the basis of Lord Buddha's first sermon, which was in Sarnath, in the deer park, when he spoke to 5 of his earlier followers who had left him. And this is the famous teaching on the Four Noble Truths. Now, the teaching itself, the way it is first enumerated, is very straightforward, very simple. The Buddha just says, monks, this is suffering, this is the cause of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, this is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. His whole concern is suffering, its cause, its ending, and the way to bring about the cessation or ending of suffering. So he just says this, and the people he's talking to are so mature, so ripe in some sense. Just this statement already allows one of them to attain a clear perception of the truth. He becomes what's called an arhat in the Buddhist tradition. The remaining 4 are still not understanding, so he repeats it, this time from the point of view of what is the functional relation of each of these. And he says the truth of suffering is something which you must realize. The truth of the cause is something you must abandon. The truth of cessation is something which you must make manifest. And the truth of the path is something you should follow in order to make manifest the cessation of suffering. When he says it the second time, then the others also attain enlightenment. And then he makes his claim that I have realized the truth of suffering. I have abandoned its causes. I have manifested cessation of suffering. I have fully and completely followed the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So let's go into it a little more. I'll try to condense it as much as possible, but it's quite a vast topic, so it may take a little longer than my presentation of last time. Okay, what is the truth of suffering? When the Buddha said this is suffering, he meant that this body mind of ours is of the nature of suffering. He was not just talking about some outer world. He's saying this very mind and body, the way it's constituted, is of the nature of suffering. What do we understand by the nature of suffering? Now, there are many presentations about suffering in the Buddhist teachings. I don't have time to go into the different, all the different ones. I will just take one where suffering is classified into 3 forms or 3 levels of suffering. The first level is, the suffering of suffering, that is actual physical pain, actual mental anguish, actual worry, anxiety, and all these things. This suffering is so obvious that even animals are easily able to recognize this form of suffering. If a cat is being bitten by all kinds of small insects, then you'll see it rolling on the mud, trying to shake off this. Or if an elephant, again, is being oppressed by the heat, the insects, it'll go into a river and then come out and take a mud bath. So even animals have this instinctive desire to put away the suffering of suffering, that is obvious physical pain and any kind of mental anguish. And among human beings, we all, whenever we fall slightly ill or something, we go to the doctor. If you're hungry, we eat something. If you're thirsty, we go drink. So obviously, a lot of our behavior is oriented towards ending the more obvious manifest sufferings called the suffering of suffering. The second level of suffering which the Buddha identified is called the suffering of change. Now, the suffering of change is not something which the world recognizes as suffering, but all our transient forms of happiness actually are part of the suffering of change. We think that something is bringing us happiness, but the Buddha says this is not genuine happiness. If you go on indulging in that thing, you will end up feeling a sense of pain. So, for example, you're feeling cold. You go out into the sun. Initially, the warmth of the sun is very pleasant and you feel happy. But if the sun was a source of happiness, then the more you stay in the sun, the happier you should become. But if you continue to stay in the sun, after a time, the heat becomes oppressive and you seek the shade. Okay, again, if you stay too long in the shade, again, you feel cold and move. Likewise, any of the physical postures of sitting, if you sit for too long, if you stand for too long, if you walk for too long, if you lie down for too long, okay, all these which are sources of happiness are actually what the Buddhists call the suffering of change. But this at the physical level. If you look at it at a more subtle level, at mental level, you think something brings you happiness. You have a new gadget or something like that, a new car. Initially, driving around in it gives you a good sense of happiness, of whatever, satisfaction, etc. But after a while, you tend to get a little tired of it, bored of it. And then you look for something else to give you happiness. So all kind of material objects. We built a new house, good furniture, all these things. We're very proud of it. We're happy about it. We invite a lot of people to come and visit us. But after a time, we get restless. We want to build another house somewhere in the hills, in a hill station. And we spend a lot of energy building that house, thinking that'll bring us happiness. Again, that brings us happiness for a short while. Afterwards, it tends to become a burden. I have to keep going there to see that it's maintained well. It doesn't deteriorate. Nobody steals anything from it, etc. So any of these things which we pursue, wealth, properties, and so on, which we think are sources of happiness, actually are classified by Buddhists, by the Lord Buddha, into what he calls the suffering of change. Even more subtly, in a relationship with somebody. You have a friend, and initially that relationship is going very well. You want to be together all the time. But then maybe something happens and it's no longer so pleasant. So that relationship which was bringing you a lot of joy now becomes something which actually brings you unhappiness. So the Buddha is saying that all the things that we pursue, imagining that it will bring us happiness, are all in the nature of the suffering of change. And that therefore they are not real or genuine happiness. So this is a second form of suffering, which is not so obvious. In fact, not at all obvious, because the whole world is running after these things, imagining that it will bring them happiness, and it doesn't. And then they run after other things, and those don't bring them happiness. And they run after yet other things. Just 1 second, sorry. So this is the second level of suffering. The third level of suffering is even more subtle. The third level of suffering is that the Buddha is saying this entire body-mind complex of ours is of the nature of suffering. As long as we retain the present body and mind of ours, we will not find any kind of enduring happiness. Now, why is he saying that? Most of us actually are quite happy with our present body and mind. Of course, there are aspects of our body which we would, if we have some illness and so on, then we want to get out of that illness, etc. Or if you have some physical handicap, then we want to be without that handicap. Mentally also, there are times when we are going through unpleasant mental states, we want to get rid of that. But basically, we feel that when we search for happiness, we want and think that we will find happiness with this existing mind and body. And the third level of suffering that the Buddha is saying is that this mind and body is of the nature of suffering. You cannot find stable happiness with your existing body and mind. Now, why is he saying that? Okay. To do that, we need to actually go quite a lot into Buddhist understanding of life, birth, etc. But I'll try and keep it short. In the Buddhist understanding, our present body and mind is the product or arises out of our past karma, which is based on all kinds of afflictive emotions. These afflictive emotions, in turn, are rooted in a fundamental ignorance, in a fundamental grasping at self. To try and illustrate what I mean, I'll go back to an example I gave last time. Somebody says something which I find offensive. I feel unhappy. When there is unhappiness in my mind, aggression arises. I want to root out or stamp out the source of this unhappiness, which is the other person who made this kind of statement. At the very least, I want to put him in his place. So this anger is arising. This anger is leading to either verbal or physical actions which are negative. Now, in the Buddha's understanding, when you act in this way, then you cannot escape from the fruit of that action. It's not just immediately that being angry is disturbing your own mind, which it is. That's an immediate negative consequence of anger, but it has a long-term negative consequence, which you will meet up with sometime either in this life or in a future life, because the Buddha clearly spoke about many lives and a continuum of lives. So your present or my present body and mind has arisen out of negative actions like this based on afflictive emotions like anger, jealousy, hatred, attachment, and so on. There are 5 basic negative and number of secondary ones. The 5 basic ones are anger, attachment, pride, jealousy, and wrong view. Now, why do I get angry when somebody says something which is offensive? If you go deeper into that, why does this anger arise? Why am I unhappy? It's because of a strong sense of self, a strong sense of grasping at I or me. How dare he say that about me? I am well known to the world. So many people have realized all the great things I have done, etc., etc. Or I come from this kind of family, or I am an honest man. Why is he accusing me of corruption? So underlying the rising of anger is a strong sense of self and a grasping at the strong self of self. This grasping leads to a cherishing. I want to protect this self. I want everything the best for this self. And therefore, this person is blocking that or preventing that or destroying my happiness, my reputation, my well-being, and I get angry. Now, the Buddha says this sense of self is fundamentally based on a misconception. And if we analyze this and understand and ask ourselves, who am I? Who is this self? We will find that this self doesn't exist in any part of the body or any part of the mind, nor does it exist outside it. And these are the only 2 possibilities. If there's such an independent, strong I, then the I must be either body or mind or both, or some part of the body or some part of the mind must be the I. If you remove body and mind, there's no I, which you can identify, which you can point to. So he's saying this sense of self is fundamentally a misconception. There is no such self. Is the I my arm? No. Is it my head? No. Is it my heart? No. So it's no part of my body. Is it the whole body? No. Is it my mind? Which part of my mind? Is it my perceptions? My perceptions are changing from moment to moment. Is it my feelings? My feelings are changing from moment to moment. Is it my emotions? They're also changing from moment to moment. Nothing in my mind is remaining the same. But when I grasp with this sense of I feel this is the same I that existed yesterday, that will exist tomorrow, that was there when I was in school. Okay, I write that I was finished my physics exams in Loyola in 1970. Okay, and in some sense, conventionally, I'm saying that I is the same as this I, but it's not. There is no such continuous I. That is a fundamental root misconception, according to the Buddha's teaching. When we search for this I, which we so automatically assume exists, we find there is no such I. So if there is no such I, that means we are working on a basic misconception of the nature of things. Likewise, there's no such other. That person who said something offensive, I think he is always like that. He's an evil person. He's a bad person. He goes on saying negative things about everybody. He's a jealous person. Okay, so I imagine that person who makes the offensive remark, that he also exists independently. Yet when I ask who is that person, is he his mind? But one day he may have been kind to me, the same person. Today he's making an offensive remark against me. So which is the true person? The kind one or the offensive one? So he also is not all the time going around morning till night thinking about offending me. In a particular set of circumstances, he got carried away by his own anger and he said something offensive. Then I get carried away by my anger at his offensive remark and I say something offensive back. But there's neither an independent I nor an independent other. But all the time we are making this unconsciously, without even realizing it. We are making these assumptions and we are relating to ourselves and the world in this way. And therefore we are constantly creating negative karma. Not maybe all the time, but most of the time. We are creating negative karma, and the Buddha says, when you create negative karma, then its imprints are there in your mind. And it will bear fruit sometime. Maybe in this life, maybe in a later life. And the fruit it bears depends on the kind of action, the intention behind that action. If I intended to hurt him, that action is a negative action. So just like a tamarind seed can give rise only to a tamarind tree and not an apple tree or a neem tree, and a neem seed can give rise only to a neem tree whose fruit is bitter and not a mango tree whose fruit is sweet. Likewise, every karma has its own specific maturation. Now, to come back to this most subtle level of truth, when he said this mind-body complex of ours is of the nature of suffering, he is not saying that all the time we are going through physical pain or, mentally that we are going through bad states of mind. He's not saying that. He's just saying this body mind of ours has been created by past kleshas, that is afflictive emotions and karma. It is other powered. It is not in our own power. What is going to happen to us tomorrow, day after, today, in the next hour is not in our power. Anything may happen. Things may be going very well for us and then something negative may happen. So he is saying that because of this, because it's not in your own power, it is of the nature of suffering. Any kind of happiness you are presently experiencing can and will sooner or later change into suffering. Because it is other powered. And this other thing that is powering it is ignorance and afflictive emotions, karma and kleshas. And the root klesha is ignorance, avidya. So what the Buddha was saying when he said this is suffering, he is saying that our own minds and bodies, to which we are very attached, is of the nature of suffering. So when he said about the first noble truth, what's the function of the first noble truth? It is to realize it, to come to a clear realization that the nature of our bodies and minds is that of suffering, irrespective of whether presently we are going through nice, pleasant, comfortable experiences or not. Now, this is the first noble truth, which he said we need to realize. And we need to think about it a lot. We need to look at our own experiences. Sometimes we can see it while the experience is arising itself. Sometimes later on we realize by thinking about our past experiences, thinking about the fact, for example, that all my life I've been looking for happiness. Have I found it? Or have I not found it? As I said, some might have. But if you see the vast majority of people, they have not. They're still searching. They're still anxious. They still want this or that or the other. Now, the root of this, as we have just seen, is kleshas and karma. But more fundamental than the karma is the klesha, is the afflictive emotion, anger, jealousy, etc., attachment. And that is rooted in ignorance. So the more fundamental is the klesha, and the root of the klesha is ignorance. Now, once the Buddha identified this, the question is this ignorance innate part of our mind, or is it not an innate part of our mind? And he saw that it is not an innate part of the mind. There are times when the sense of I is very strong in us. There are other times when it's not there. If it's an innate part of the mind, then the sense of I must be there all the time. Likewise, the kleshas, if they were an innate part of the mind, then I should be, if I'm angry once, I should be always angry. If I'm jealous once, I should always be jealous. But no, I'm sometimes angry, sometimes jealous, sometimes happy, sometimes generous, sometimes kind. Okay. So all these different mental states are arising and passing away. So each of them has its own specific causes. And the root cause of all is the grasping at self. So he said, if this is not an innate part of the mind and it is wrong, can it be removed? And he came to the conclusion that yes, it can be removed. Because there's a very clear reasoning, it shows why it is wrong. I've already explained it briefly to you. If there is such an I, where is it? You know, if you say something exists, you must be able to show it to me. If you can't show it to me in some form or the other, then it doesn't exist. So if there's an I, it must be either in my mind or my body. It can't be my body, and my body has so many different parts. So does my mind. And even if you say one part is the mind, that part is also going on changing. But the sense of I that you have or I have is one that is the same from babyhood to today. The same I, the same Rajan. That's what I believe. And that belief is false. So it's easy to refute that belief. Now, refuting it intellectually is one thing. It's a necessary step, but it's by no means sufficient. Okay, you must see that there is no such I. But in order to refute it fundamentally, to root it out of your mind, because this habit or this tendency to cling to I and to cherish this I is very deeply rooted in our minds, even though it is not innate. Okay, so to root it out of our minds, we have to have very clear perception of it. In the Buddhist understanding of path, it is this clear perception of the falsity of the I which roots out everything. Because the kleshas are dependent on this false perception. When you clearly see that there is no such I, then jealousy won't arise in your mind. Anger, after all, who is he offending if there is no I? The way I think there is an I doesn't exist. Who is getting offended and who is offending who? Who am I getting attached to? Who am I? And who is the person I'm getting attached to? Okay, so when you have a very clear perception, then you remove not only this fundamental ignorance in the mind, but all the negative, afflictive emotions which are dependent on this. And this, therefore, is a possibility. And therefore, he asserts a third noble truth, which is it is possible to end this suffering because it has a specific cause. And this cause is not permanent. It's not intrinsic to the mind, so it can be removed. So though on the one hand, the Buddha appears pessimistic when he says everything is of the nature of suffering, in fact, he's, if you want to use the word, very optimistic, because he says there is the possibility of ending of suffering, and you can do it, not some god, not some other person, not the Buddha. He can't end your suffering. You have to see this for yourself. Nobody can see it for you. Your own mind must see what it's doing, how it's being led onto false paths, how it's being deluded. And if you see that clearly, then the delusion goes away. And then there is a cessation, ending of suffering. Now, how do you go about this? What is the path, which is the fourth noble truth? Strictly speaking, technically, if you understand what is meant by path in the Buddhist tradition, path is a moment of consciousness. That moment where you actually see there is no such self, that the self is a delusion, that moment of consciousness is called the path. This is a strict meaning of the word path. And it's always a direct perception of the absence of self. Not an intellectual understanding of it, but a direct perception of it. But in order to come to this direct perception, there are many preparatory things we need to do. So in a kind of secondary sense, they speak about the path in this as these preparatory things. Right now, our minds are very unstable. Okay, we are not able to focus for any period of time. So even if we get some realization that what is being said is true, we don't keep it in our mind. It goes away. Very soon other habits come. I'm thinking of other things and I'm getting angry again, jealous again, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So then this power of this idea is not much. In order to deepen this, you need to develop in the Buddhist understanding what's called calm abiding. A calm abiding is a stability of mind by which you can stay with an idea and look at it for incredible lengths of time without getting distracted or diverted to other things. When you can do that, they say that this idea that there is no such self, when you begin to look at it deeply, more and more deeply, ultimately it becomes what they call a direct perception. No longer a conceptual idea, but a direct perception of absence of self. Sometimes in some Buddhist school, they call it the emptiness of self. Lack of inherent existence of such a self. When you have that direct perception, then and only then does it go away, does it get rooted out. Before that, you can subdue it through various means. When you listen to a teaching, for a time being, that sense of self may get weakened, but you can't root it out. You can only root it out through perception. Direct experience, direct perception. But they say that direct perception requires certain conditions. It requires a very stable mind. Now they say further that this very stable mind is only possible if you live a life of good conduct. If you're cheating others and doing this, or if you're consuming a lot of alcohol or eating a lot of, heavy food and all that, yeah, all that disturbs the mind, either mentally or because the body is not in a good shape, the mind also is being affected. So they prescribe Shila, certain ways of living, certain conduct, right livelihood, and so on and so forth. Okay, right behavior, right speech. All these as laying the foundation for developing calm abiding, which they call samadhi. So Shila, Samadhi, but both of these are preparation for what is actually the path, prajna, wisdom. It only this, I said, the actual technical definition of path in the Buddhist teaching is this moment of consciousness when you are actually directly experiencing the absence of self. But to arrive at that, all these earlier conditions are needed. There may be people who are born with this ability. They say Ramana Maharshi, suddenly one day he got this feeling of, I'm dying. So what does he do? He just lies down in bed and his whole death experience goes through his mind. But his mind is so stable, and the Buddhists would say it's because of his vasanas from previous lives, that when he has this one experience, it transforms his life fundamentally. Many of us, I have felt at times I'm going to die. But that experience only stayed with me for a short while. For a couple of days, it made me a little more serious, but then I forgot it. So in order to develop that stable mind of samadhi, you need prajna, and samadhi is a condition for direct perception to arise. So this is the truth of the path. So this is what the Buddha taught in his first sermon. And in some sense, the rest of Buddha's teachings, all subsequent Buddhist teachings, are elaborations of this. Going into some detail or elaborating something else or talking about certain other conditions and so on and so forth. But the nutshell, the foundation of any Buddhist school is the Four Noble Truths. And they are that we are in a condition of suffering. Our very minds and bodies are suffering. The root cause of this is our own actions, our own karma, which has arisen from afflictive emotions, which again are rooted in ignorance. And then the teaching that this klesha, this ignorance is adventitious, it's not in the nature of our minds, therefore it can be removed. Therefore, the cessation of suffering completely and absolutely is possible. There is a state, the Buddha says, which is completely free of suffering. It's a very beautiful passage in the early Buddhist scriptures which describes that. And then that there is a path. But remember, path ultimately means this consciousness. In order to attain that consciousness, you may have to do many things. Certainly, you will have to straighten out your life starting from now. You will have to lead more disciplined. Nobody's telling you to. You have to see the need for it. And then, because you see the need for it, you do various things. You change your diet, from physical things like that, yoga, whatever it is, to, for example, not indulging your mind in all kinds of things which you might have been indulging them in, including watching too much TV or whatever it is. Anything which makes the mind restless, which agitates the mind, you have to drop it from your life. And then you have to listen to the Buddha's teachings. So listening is very important. And the listening with the motivation that I spoke about, that you're doing this not just for yourself, but for all beings. And you're doing it because you realize there's something wrong with me. Whatever I've been trying has not led to happiness. It's drawing me again and again back to suffering. Therefore, if I listen carefully and understand what he's saying, maybe I will find a solution. Okay, so I made a brief presentation of the Four Noble Truths. It's very brief, but it's a very vast topic. But since you wanted a kind of some presentation of the Buddhist understanding of the world, I've attempted to do so. Thank you. Maybe now we can have some discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chandy. I think you have put it very forthrightly and in a very simple way for all of us to understand. I think Harshad Bhai has raised his hand. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Yes. Are you able to hear?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Rajan. It is very, very interesting, very simple, and you explain very well the Four Noble Truths. When I was young in school and college, I knew a little bit of Buddha and his teachings, but I first came to Krishnamurti in 1970s, and when I was reading his book, then I found it very, very interesting, and I began to look at my own mind very clearly, and it helped me very much. So I came to Krishnamurti first, and few years ago, when I read Thich Nathan's biography, Old Path, White Cloud, I found it very, very beautiful writing, very simple, very touching. And then I felt that Buddha was probably the most intelligent human being who ever lived on this earth. And then and I found it very interesting, the book and the teachings. And then I begin to think about Krishnamurti and Buddha. And one day I begin to imagine that there is a dialogue between Krishnamurti and Buddha. And what happens is that in my imagination, Krishnamurti was in Varanasi and he had gone for a walk and he came to Deer Park in Sarnath and he saw that Buddha was giving a talk to his disciples and all the Buddha's disciples, they were listening spellbound, and after Buddha finished his talk, then he said, anybody who would like to ask any question, you can ask. At that time, Krishnamurti says, beloved teacher, can I ask you some questions? And Buddha said, yes, young man, you can ask questions and your questions will help my disciples. So the first question Krishnamurti asked is that, was it necessary for you to leave the palace to get this enlightenment, or you could have got it while being in the palace? So because in Krishnamurti's teachings that you don't need to go anywhere in the forest or to guru, but wherever you are, in your room, if you can really look at yourself, then there is a real understanding of how this false I comes through thinking. And then there is something else apart from thinking, which he calls awareness. And once that awareness is ignited, then one can see the coming and going of this I. And so in Krishnamurti's teachings, there is no need to go anywhere. Wherever you are, you can understand yourself. So that was the first question. And Buddha said, answered that yes, I had to, because in the palace, I had many responsibilities and I had no time, I had a family, so I needed to get away. And one thing about Buddha is that though Buddha went to many gurus and he learned and his gurus were very happy, but Buddha felt that it was not enough. And even a king came and wanted to become a disciple of Buddha, and he said, I will give you my half kingdom if you can teach me. And Buddha said, I am still not ready to give a talk, and only after he had enlightenment, then only he gave the first talk to his 5 friends. And while Buddha was describing, Kondana got it very immediately, and Buddha said, Kondana, you have got it. So it depends on how we listen, how we read a book. And the second question was, Krishnamurti asked was, through time, through effort, can we come to the timeless dimension? Because in Buddha, there is a lot of effort, a lot of time, practices involved, whereas Krishnamurti says that there is no time, immediate, you can get perception. And once that perception comes, that becomes the action. And the Buddha answers that yes, one can get insight very quickly, but then one needs to deepen, to stabilize that insight. Otherwise, it may come and go. And the third question Krishnamurti asked was that why your disciples are chanting Buddham Sharanam Gacchami? Are you not making your disciples dependent on you? And Buddha said, yes, you are right. As long as they have not realized they will be with me, but once they get this direct perception, then they will go away in their own way. So I feel that Krishnamurti's teachings helped me very much. I did not need to go through many books, but I began to look at my own mind uh, by reading Krishnamurti and looking within, and everything became very clear that yes, from this thought, the thinker arises. And then once this thinker or I comes, then he says, I like it, I don't like it. And so there is a duality between thinker and thought. And Krishnamurti says that all our psychological problems are because of this duality between thinker and thought. And I found it very interesting. And I gave my whole attention to observe the beginning of a thought. And I found that, yes, when the mind is very silent and very observant, there nothing is happening. And in that nothingness, there is a kind of a clarity, freedom. And that became very, very interesting to me in my life. And so I pursue Krishnamurti's teaching. But you are also right that some people can get it like Kondana got it very quickly. And Kasapa also, he just looked at the flower and he smiled and got it non-verbally. So some people get it, but most people maybe need to go through a lot of reading and practicing and slowly coming to this realization. So, okay, I have finished my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshad bhai. Yes, I think I see Mr. Ambarish raising hands. Yes, please go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yeah. So can I ask my question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So my question is like, why did a flawed being emerge in nature with a center with intention? Like
Sorry?
if
Can you repeat that? I didn't get the first part. Why did
yeah,
what?
what I understood was that we ourselves, who I am calling as I, that itself is a flaw. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yeah, it's a flawed perception. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a flawed perception. So why did this flawed perception emerge in the first place? This whole way this of my being. And if corresponding to that is another question, like if there is no intention, then what is consciousness? That can we say that a being can exist without intentions? And what is the context of all of this? The emergence of such a state where there is intention? Because this I, the emergence of I, what is the context of this emergence of this I? Why did it emerge in the first place? So
Yeah. Can
Yeah.
I answer that?
Yes,
yeah,
please.
yes.
Yeah. See, the Buddhists say that there is no beginning to this misconception. If you say, why did it emerge in the first place, then you have to say that it wasn't there and then it came. Okay. If you say it wasn't there at some point and then it came, then you have to ask, what is the cause of it?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what
But,
yeah.
there are, you'll have to ask, what is the cause of the universe? Which Western science is asking and Western metaphysics is asking, and the Christian tradition asks, or the Semitic tradition asks these questions. They believe in a creator, God, okay, who created this. So if you ask in the Christian tradition, why is man suffering like this? They'll give you the story of the Garden of Eden, Adam, Eve, and so on. Okay. The Buddhists find all such explanations defective. If you say there is a creator who created this, how did he come into being? If you say he's a permanent entity, he was always there. If he's a permanent entity, then he can't suddenly start creating the world. Because if he's permanent means he's immutable, he's not changing. So if he creates the world at point X, he has to also create the world at point A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Because the moment you say no, A, B, C, D, F, G moments, he was not creating the world, but at the moment X, he was creating the world, then you say he has changed. At the moment X, some new activity has come up in him, which was not there earlier, which means he is not permanent. Okay, so because of these logical problems which arise by positing a creator, a first cause, the Buddhists say there is no beginning. So the question, why does this misconception arise in the mind? And in Buddhism, it's not only human beings, okay? All beings, animals, even an insect. If you put your finger in front of an ant, it'll shrink, or an insect. It'll turn away. It'll get the feeling something is about to harm me. So the sense of I, the sense of self, is there not only as far as the Buddhists are concerned, in the human world, it's there in the animal world, it's there in the insect world. Okay. So the question why it arose is not something which the Buddha says an answer can be given. Just like the question, why did the universe begin? There is no answer. It has no beginning. It is
So
beginningless.
So it will continue to the what you're calling the flawed perception of eyes. It will continue to emerge.
It will continue to emerge until you consciously put a stop to it.
No, but if
no, it is not innate to the mind.
So what is this?
Adventitious. When you say, see, anger, for example, if it was innate to your mind, then you'll always be angry. There'll be no moment of time when you're not angry.
To whom this anger arises? This itself, you're saying that it's a falsity.
But in your mind, I'm saying, anger is not innate. I don't know if you're getting my innate. Yes, means it necessarily belongs to your mind.
I understand that.
Your mind cannot be without anger. Likewise, they say this false conception, though it's a habit of the mind, it is not innate to the mind. The mind can be freed of it. The Buddha's mind is freed of it. Krishnaji's mind is freed of it. Other people's minds are freed of it.
So did they exist without any intentions?
No, you don't need an I to have intention.
They continued to have a center.
Not this kind of center. See, the Buddha.
So some kind of a center.
No, if you mean by center, I don't know exactly what you mean by center.
By center, I mean there is a center which is saying that yes, I am the being with, and I have this interest. So I'm moving in a certain direction. So when I am moving, I'm drinking water, which means to address this center. Okay.
Okay.
So I
Now
want
there
to
are,
go away from suffering, which means there is a center
okay,
which behaves in a certain way. It has some cause there in the center.
there are two ways in which in Buddhism the notion of I or self are used.
Okay.
One is this I, which you're calling a center.
Right.
Okay, I want to go away from suffering. I want this. I want, that's a strong sense of I.
Okay.
Okay, that sense of I is that the belief or the feeling or the assumption that this I exists independent of body and mind. Right? So that's one
Sorry?
sense of I.
Could you repeat the last statement once again?
This sense of I is a strong sense of I, which somewhere believes this I is independent of body and mind. After all, this body was changing. Okay, 71 years back, it was an infant. Today, it's an
Yeah.
oldish man. Yeah. So the body is changing, but the I is the same. Okay, that's
Yeah.
a strong sense of I.
No, no.
It's
So
independent
it's a
of body.
changing I. It's a changing I.
That's not
but-
how you get it. If you see, that's not how you're grasping the I. Okay.
No, so
if you're saying it's a changing I, yeah.
Yeah, because for something to live, it has to change. For some process to happen.
But when
If
you get
something is
yeah, please
Yeah.
listen to me. When you
Yeah.
get angry,
right.
observe your mind at that moment. Okay, you don't have at that moment the kind of my eye is changing, situation is changing, the
No,
person is now
no,
who's saying offensive is changing. You have a solid sense of I being, how can he say this to me?
No.
Okay, so in that sense of I, you have to get it. You have to think, okay? You have to actually watch your mind when you're angry, when you have strong attachment, when you're in great fear, you're walking along the precipice of a cliff.
So, but there is a
And-
reason. But there is a. So we are trying.
Try to listen to what I'm saying. Okay. Unless you yourself see the strong sense of I, you won't understand what I'm saying about the weak sense of I. Let me tell you what is a weak sense of I. The weak sense of I is I, Rajan, I'm different from you. Sorry, I didn't get your name. Ambarish. Yeah? There is a clear difference between your body and my body, your mind and my mind. So to use the term Rajan to describe this body or to talk about this body as against Ambarish talking about that body, is perfectly legitimate as far as the Buddhists are concerned.
Okay.
This is the weak sense of I. This
Okay.
is not the I or the Rajan and so on is just a name.
Okay.
It's a name which doesn't actually refer to anything. But when I use the sense of I when I'm angry, this I refers to some strong sense of me. Otherwise, I won't get angry.
Okay.
Okay. Because this weak sense of I
So this weak
cannot
sense
support
of
this weak sense of I. Therefore, then the Buddha says, I will teach, or Krishna says, I am teaching. He doesn't like to use the word I, but sometimes he does. He says the speaker. Okay. When he's using this weak sense of I am teaching, it's just a description. I, Krishnaji, am different from Achyut Patwardhan, from Pupulji, from
Right,
somebody
so-
else, from somebody else. Yeah?
why it is continuing to behave.
Can I intervene?
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
intervene? I think, Mr. Mishra, you can write a note to Rajan and get your answers. There are many other people who would like to ask questions. Okay.
So
Because it-
how can I write a note? Like how can I contact him or like?
How did you come to know about this site? So you write to the people
Okay.
who sent you this.
All
and
right.
You'll get
Okay.
Rajan's email ID.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
This becomes just one question answer, which is not the purpose of this dialogue. Okay.
All right. Thank you, sir.
We can go to other questions. Preity Mishra wanted to ask something. Please unmute yourself. Yes. Ask your question.
Rajan sir, namaskar and good morning to everybody.
Can you
here.
switch on your video if you don't mind? And you ask a question.
Yeah, sure. I can.
Yes.
Uh, Actually, this video creates little disturbance, so I would like to switch it off. Is that okay
Okay.
if I'm
Okay.
on audio mode? Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Now, sir, as we have discussed, I would not like to elaborate this, because so many content participants are here. But I would like to highlight one thing you have. Mm, like we suffer, there is a cause for suffering, and the cause you said, according to Buddha, is desire and ignorance, right? By desire, we mean that craving for materialistic goods, immortality, wants, and needs, all these things. Now, so my question here is very simple, that we as a consciousness, if we are existing here on this planet, we would keep on desiring, right? And if
We
not,
will.
then what is
Sorry.
the, we would keep on desiring for one thing or the another in this materialistic world. Sometimes we want good education, sometimes we want good food, sometimes we want good, we want to travel across, we want to see, all the beautiful things in life. We will come to the second part that, yeah, if it cannot be fulfilled, that is a different aspect. But what is the aim of, of ours to be here on this earth if we can't desire? Because here, desire and ignorance are two main reasons for, why do we suffer. So why do we exist? What is our aim here on this planet to exist?
See, in the Buddhist understanding, the aim of all sentient beings is to attain happiness
All right.
and to overcome suffering. There's no
Mhm.
more fundamental aim than that. The Buddhists don't accept some God and God having created us and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, what characterizes all sentient life is the desire for happiness and to avoid suffering. So, that's the aim. There's no other more metaphysical aim than that. What they are saying is that this aim is perfectly legitimate, but when you try to realize this aim through desire based on this ignorance, you will be frustrated. You will never realize it. Okay. But the Buddha is saying that that doesn't mean you can't attain happiness. When he talks about the cessation of suffering, he's talking about a supreme happiness, a kind of a happiness which doesn't fluctuate from moment to moment. And I told you, there's a very beautiful passage where the Buddha is saying that there is such a place. If there was no such place, there would be no point in all these things I'm talking about. But there is such a place. That's his assertion, and his assertion is that he has attained that. And he is explaining how it is possible or why it is possible to attain that, because he has identified the cause of suffering, which, as you rightly say, is ignorance and desire, but not just desire, all the kleshas, anger, jealousy, etc., which all arise out of ignorance. This ignorance is a flawed perception. We can understand its flaw and we can change it into a correct perception. Once we do that, there is an ending of suffering. So, as a human being, you are in a very privileged position. This is what the Buddha said. The animals are also wanting happiness and so on, but they don't have the kind of intelligence that we have to be able to really address the issue. But as a human being, we have that possibility. So if you ask what's the aim of this life, it is to use that possibility to the utmost, to attain and deepen your understanding to the utmost, so that you will be able to eventually, if not in this life, in the future life, attain this state of complete cessation.
All right. And by ignorance, he means like all vices, such as, being
No,
greedy,
no, no.
being envious, being,
The ignorance is more
anguish.
fundamental. Ignorance is more fundamental. It's thinking there is an I, which is independent of body and mind. Perceiving this I, that is ignorance. Based on that, because of that, jealousy arises. If there is no such I, who am I to be jealous of? Who am I to be jealous in the first place?
But
So
for sure, there are fundamental reasons why we fell into such traps of being jealous, being envious, feeling inferior, feeling superior, just because
what are these fundamental reasons?
I mean, why we feel angry if something is not we are not comfortable with some situation, with any kind of offensive words used by the other person or anything, like we are not comfortable, we try to shun off with that particular condition, and we always, as you said, we always drive ourselves to be very comfortable in every situation. However, when we are in a situation where there is a lot of competition, the system is such that it does not allows us to enjoy the most of our happiness of our life, then we feel we usually get envious, or we get angry, or we are not in a very comfortable situation. So these are the reasons.
Yeah, what is
Could
the
you please help me
source?
out
What
with
is the reason for your discomfort? I can answer this question. It would take quite some time. But
Yeah.
if you examine the reasons for your discomfort, I explained it a bit in the last talk also. You are uncomfortable because you think I am a great person. I, Rajan, am a great teacher. Okay. That is my understanding. I feel there is some Rajan here, and that this Rajan is a great teacher, and then somebody comes and says, actually, he doesn't know anything. Okay. And I feel this is, very bad. I go into a lot of discomfort. Now, what is the cause of my discomfort? That person's statement, or my false feeling of being an independent person who is a great teacher? If I didn't have that feeling of being a great teacher, okay, irrespective of whether some people consider me a good teacher, others don't. But it's my feeling of being, sorry, let me finish. It's my feeling of being a great teacher which gets offended. To use Krishnaji's language, it's my image of myself which is getting hurt, which is getting offended, right? So if I don't have this image of myself, and the Buddhists are saying this image of ourselves is arising from a more fundamental thing, that I am holding on to a sense of I. If I am able to remove that sense of I will not have any image of myself. Tomorrow you come and say, your intelligence is below par. Okay, you don't understand anything. It's a statement. Okay, it's a word, some words flying around. Why should it harm me? Who's the me to be harmed? Okay, so when we say there are objective reasons for getting angry, for being competitive, for being jealous, for being envious, there are none. Let me put it radically. There is no objective reason. It's all in our mind. Okay, that's what, in this sense, I think both the Buddha and Krishnaji are both saying the same thing. Slightly different language, but the same thing.
Oh, all right. So can we have a discussion, a detailed discussion on this particular topic sometimes, whenever you are quite comfortable, because I really want to know more into detail, because I have many questions into this, but keeping in mind that other participants are also waiting.
Fine.
So
See,
I would take your...
I don't promise to respond immediately, but you can email me. And I don't like this long emails, but we can set up a WhatsApp conversation or something.
Sure. I would like to have your number so that I can stay in touch with you over WhatsApp, and then we can proceed ahead with our conversation. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pradeep Verma. Yes, please unmute yourself.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Rajan, you have spoken so well, and you have covered most of the points. Very good. The only thing what appealed to me specifically, maybe you can call it my eye, that the fire sermon, the firing of neurons in your brain is stressful. The brain is literally burning with movement. The ear, nose, tongue, body, mind are burning with the fire of greed, of anger, and of ignorance. This can be felt by all of us very easily in almost all the situations when the temperature goes up and different organs, how they start burning. Because anyway, things are burning, but there is a balance probably somewhere there. But otherwise, you can feel that intensity of that fire in me under certain situations. So this is an important thing, I think. You may elaborate on this thing a few more sentences, but that was, I think. And then suffering of change is not for all, maybe rarely certain people, not, it is for all. But if we are not attached to a particular pattern of happiness, then change is very welcome, which leads to freshness, a newness, you see, and a different vitality we can feel. I believe so. For such a person, change is not a source of unhappiness or suffering. Thank you very much giving me enough time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we'll take the last question. Harshad Bhai, please go ahead. Comments, whatever.
Yeah. Yes. Are you able to hear?
Yes, yes, we are.
Yes. When you were discussing about two kind of self or I, my view is that this false self or weak self, it comes from thinking, and thinking is unique to human beings. Animals have instinct, human beings have intellect and language, and from that language, this sense of I or image comes. And but human beings are capable of something higher than intellect, and that what Krishnaji calls intelligence or awareness. And as long as that awareness is not awakened, we will have so many questions, because we have given so much importance to intellect and to find out everything through thinking. But the thinking cannot see the whole of thinking. One has to come out from thinking and feeling in a different dimension, which is called choiceless awareness or intelligence. And as long as that is not happened, there will be many, many doubts and questions, and people can go round and round in that plane of thinking and feeling. So, another thing about from Buddhism, that Angulimal met Buddha for the first time, and though he had lived a criminal life, he was changed in the first contact with Buddha. So such a thing is possible for any human being to get the insight very quickly if it really happens. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Harshad Bhai. Thank you. Yes, Prasad sir, please go ahead.
Sir, the talk is really wonderful. But then I have just one or two small questions. First thing is, Mr. Pradeep Verma has referred to the fire sermon. And my understanding of this fire sermon is that we are burning with desire and sensuous avocations. I don't know whether that is the correct understanding or whether there is something deeper in this fire sermon, because he says everything is burning. My eyes are burning, my tongue is burning, everything is burning. So whether that understanding is correct or there is something else, I would like Rajanji to clarify. That is one thing. Second thing, a broader question. I find everything Buddha said is available in Krishnaji, shorn of all that, jargon or whatever. And after 2000 years or so, Krishnaji has referred, he has brought it, that ancient wisdom to the modern times and made it applicable. And I also find that most Buddhists, they are not jumping with joy. What I mean is, they are not alive. They are kind of subdued, overburdened with the technicalities of the teaching. So, sir, is there any special, this self and all that? Krishnaji has talked about it so much. Anybody who has read a bit of Krishnaji, I think he becomes aware of that problem, that we are all, carrying a big self within us. Thank you, sir. Kindly respond.
Yeah, perceptions differ. I have met many Buddhist teachers who, they're not jumping with joy, but they're very buoyant and happy in very difficult circumstances, starting with the Dalai Lama. Thich Nhat Hanh, who he mentioned, who was caught in the middle of the Vietnam War and was disliked both by the Viet Cong and the Americans. Okay, but continue to teach and so on. So there's some difference in perception about that. Secondly, see, Krishnaji had very, very great regard for the Buddha. I mean, there are so many times where he has said it. He has said, if there's a disciple of the Buddha still alive, I would walk over the entire earth to meet him. There are many times in his early life where he says, the Buddha was here, could you feel it? Could you feel him? And he also thought of the Buddha as an immense presence, too immense to be held in a single body. There are innumerable references to this, not just one or two. And therefore, it is true, I have also felt that Krishnaji has kind of rendered Buddhist ideas in a modern idiom. It's what attracted me to him a lot. I was going to do my PhD thesis on Buddhism, and one chapter was going to be comparing Krishnaji with Nagarjuna. I saw Krishnaji as the modern Nagarjuna. Anyway, so I have great regard for Krishnaji, but I think, what the Buddha did was he rediscovered a road, a path, a truth, which had long been covered up. So his stature is something quite different from even very great teachers like Krishnaji or Nagarjuna. It's my feeling. You don't need to share it or anything like that. And there's no time to go into it, but there are areas where the Buddha or the Buddhist teachings are, I feel, vaster than what Krishnaji taught. But there's no time to go into that. And about refuge, when we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we take in refuge in the Buddha as somebody who paved the way, who rediscovered the way. But we don't take refuge in the Buddha as a person. What we really take refuge in is the Dharma. And the Dharma has two aspects. One is the scriptural Dharma, what you can read in books. But the real Dharma is the realization of what is being taught in your own mind. For the Buddhists, it's very clear. I haven't met any Buddhist who's not saying this. The actual refuge is the Dharma in your mind. That is what protects you. So when we go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, it's an act of gratitude. And I think that gratitude is well placed. I feel that kind of gratitude to Krishnaji also. because though I would consider myself a Buddhist today and not a follower of Krishnamurti, I think without Krishnaji, there are many things I wouldn't have seen. And ultimately, I ended up in a Krishnamurti school. I've been here for what, more than 25 years. So I think this attitude of gratitude is something very important. And the gratitude for the Buddha, for him coming, for him teaching, for him opening the way is immense. After all, many teachers are now repeating what the Buddha said. And they are able to do that because he opened that way. I'm not saying they listen to the Buddha and imitating him, no. Okay. I'm saying that these teachings in all these diverse forms exist in the world because of the Buddha. So the Buddha is kind of an important person. But I mean, this is just a comment. There's no need to discuss it. It's my feeling. You may have different feelings, but I really feel, because living in the Krishnamurti world, I find that this attitude of gratitude is lacking. It's lacking even to Krishnaji, leave alone others. But it's important. It's important to have that attitude of gratitude, to have the attitude of some humility. All these are very important qualities, spiritual qualities. Okay, any other questions?
No, thank you. Thank you, Rajan. I think you have explained it very well. Just to inform that 2 weeks from now, we'll have a lecture by Donald Creedon, which will be basically on negation in Nagarjuna and Krishnamurti. So it will be interesting for those who are interested in this topic to take it further and listen to it. Thank you, Rajan, for being with us. It was a very interesting lecture, which brought in lots of questions and provoking questions which need further discussions. We perhaps need a separate session for answering all those questions. And we are really, really thankful that you could spare your time and be with us. Next Sunday, we'll have Clemis Petter. She would be talking on Krishnamurti's teachings in daily life. So you're all welcome to join at 11 a.m. next Sunday. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Just one thing, if anyone wants to contact me, I'm not good at emailing, but just write me an email and then I'll share my phone number with you, or you can share your phone number with me in your email, and we'll set up some. I prefer oral to writing. Okay.
Thank you, Rajanji.
Yeah, thank you all very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
We will call you back so that others can be satisfied. That's my idea.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to everyone.